thevoicebefore-the-void.net. The most spiritual Hollywood movie, Groundhog Day, 1993, starring Bill Murray, with passages read from Wikipedia, from Groundhog Almighty by Alex Kuczynski in the New York Times, from Groundhog Day, the Movie, Buddhism, and Me by Paul Schindler, and from Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, Groundhog Day Scores by Jonah Goldberg in National Review. Fair use of copyrighted material is claimed under United States copyright law for not-for-profit purposes of commentary and education. Interpretations and analysis. Groundhog Day is often considered an allegory of self-improvement, emphasizing that happiness comes from placing the needs of others above one's own selfish desires. As the released film offers no explanation why the time loop occurs, or why it ends, the viewer is left to draw his or her own conclusions. Rubin has said that while he and Ramis discussed several of the philosophical and spiritual aspects of the film, they, quote, never intended it to be anything more than a good, heartfelt, entertaining story, unquote. Groundhog Day, as an expression, has become shorthand for the concept of spiritual transcendence. As such, the film has become a favorite of some Buddhists, who see its themes of selflessness and rebirth as reflections of their own spiritual messages. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, it has been seen as a representation of purgatory. Quote, Connors goes to his own version of hell, but since he's not evil, it turns out to be purgatory, from which he is released by shedding his selfishness and committing to acts of love, unquote, wrote Jonah Goldberg. Quote, meanwhile, Hindus and Buddhists see versions of reincarnation here, and Jews find great significance in the fact that Connors is saved only after he performs mitzvahs, good deeds, and is returned to earth, not heaven, to perform more, unquote. It has even been described by some religious leaders as, quote, the most spiritual film of our time, unquote. Quote, the curse is lifted when Bill Murray blesses the day he has just lived, unquote, wrote the critic Rick Brookhiser. Quote, and his reward is that the day is taken from him. Loving life includes loving the fact that it goes, unquote. Theologian Michael P. Foley, writing for Touchstone magazine, commented on the difficulty of determining a single religious or philosophical interpretation of the film, given Ramis's, quote, ambiguous religious beliefs, unquote, as, quote, an agnostic raised Jewish and married to a Buddhist, unquote, and suggested that when not viewed through a, quote, single hermeneutical lens, unquote, the film could be seen as, quote, a stunning allegory of moral, intellectual, and even religious excellence in the face of postmodern decay, a sort of Christian Aristotelian Pilgrim's Progress for those lost in the contemporary cosmos, unquote. Others see an interpretation of Nietzsche's directive to imagine life, metaphorically or literally, as an endless repetition of events. Quote, how would you shape your actions, unquote, asks Goldberg. Quote, what would you choose to live out for all eternity, unquote. Okay. Listen to this from the New York Times, 2003. Since its debut a decade ago, Groundhog Day has become a curious favorite of religious leaders of many faiths, who all see in Groundhog Day a reflection of their own spiritual message. Curators of the series, this is a series that they're presenting the film in, polling some 35 critics in the literary, religious, and film worlds to suggest films with religious interpretations, found that Groundhog Day came up so many times that there was actually a squabble over who would write about it in the retrospectives catalog. Harold Ramis, the director of the film and one of its writers, said last week that since it came out, he has heard from Jesuit priests, rabbis, and Buddhists, and that the letters keep coming. Quote, at first I would get mail saying, oh, you must be a Christian because the movie so beautifully expresses Christian belief. Then rabbis started calling from all over, saying they were preaching the film as their next sermon. And the Buddhists, well, I know they loved it because my mother-in-law has lived in a Buddhist meditation center for 30 years, and my wife lived there for 5 years, unquote. Angela Zito, a co-director of the Center for Religion and Media at New York University, screens Groundhog Day for students in her Buddhism class. She said that the film perfectly illustrates the Buddhist notion of samsara, the continuing cycle of rebirth that Buddhists regard as suffering, that humans must try to escape. Groundhog Day, Dr. Zito said, is a cinematic version of the teachings in Mahayana Buddhism, known as the Greater Vehicle. In Mahayana, she said, nobody ever imagines they are going to escape samsara until everybody does. That is why you have bodhisattvas, who reach the brink of nirvana and stop and come back and save the rest of us. Bill Murray is the bodhisattva. He is not going to abandon the world. Some theologians see much less Buddhism in the story than Judaism. Dr. Niles Goldstein, rabbi of the New Shul congregation in Greenwich Village and author of Lost Souls, Finding Hope in the Heart of Darkness, said he finds Jewish resonance in the fact that Mr. Murray's character is rewarded by being returned to earth to perform more mitzvahs, good deeds, rather than gaining a place in heaven, which is the Christian reward, or achieving nirvana, the Buddhist reward. Michael Bronski, a film critic for The Forward, who teaches a course in Jewish film history at Dartmouth, says he sees strong elements of not only Jewish but also Christian theology. The groundhog is clearly the resurrected Christ, the ever-hopeful renewal of life at springtime.
I don't remember enough of the film to even be able to...
It is powerful.
Relate to it, to what they're saying.
It is really, really powerful. Like, there's comedy in the first part of it, but there's a couple scenes then where it like just, like the one where he's in the diner, and it just sinks in when he starts explaining to Andy McDowell, like the producer character. He starts telling her about the lives of every single person in the diner. And all of them were just extras in the background. Mm-hmm. Like literally in the movie, they're extras in the background. And then there's this scene where he goes up to each one of them and he tells the producer about them, their lives. Mm. And each one of them has this whole interesting life full of emotions and heartaches and triumphs. And all they were literally in the frame of the movie, they were just in the background. Mm-hmm. And here, of a sudden, they're like these people, and they're all known to the Bill Murray character. So it's, like nobody's an extra. There's people all around you, mm-hmm. and they're all alive. And then further, like it hits like, oh my God, he's been there for years already. Like he's been, living this day over and over. Like you realize the depth that he's got that's not shown up to that point. It was just like comedy, haha, he's trying to kill himself, but then it's like that scene, it's like, oh my God. Like it is spiritual. And then, but even more powerful. And I read an article somewhere about that, different religious leaders like arguing over interpreting, like talking about what is the point, like the climactic point or the point of the turning point in the movie for the character, the Bill Murray character. And for me, like, and one guy was arguing it, and I agreed with him because that's what I felt when I watched it, was because and right away in the beginning of the movie is his, first day he's going through the day, there's a homeless man, a disheveled, dirty homeless man, like begging on the street, and it's just like, there's no dialogue from that character, like it's not a character, it's just kind of a side thing, for Bill Murray, like doing this walk through the town, and it's all funny, him being like a jerk, like going through. And like it's repeated, and again he like blows the guy off, next day, and it's just one of those. He's just one of like the many faces that he goes through in that walk through the town. Literally, he's not a person. He's just an archetype. He's just he's a Hollywood homeless person, like dirt on his face and stuff. He's just not. Your mind doesn't even register, Mm-hmm. He's just a comedic prop. Mm-hmm. But it goes to the movie, and then there's a point where where the Bill Murray character then is changing. He goes like to the homeless guy, and and there's a scene where he like spends the day with him, and the man has a heart attack and dies. And so it's the jump cut, and like the next day, and he's like back to the homeless guy again. And he's like, taking him to the hospital that day, and going through, and then like the doctor comes out and asks his relationship and said, "Well, I'm sorry, he died." And it's like next, jump cut again, next day, and he's like again trying to do something so that this homeless man who was literally just a prop in the beginning of the movie, he takes on this humanity. Bill Murray's character gives him this humanity, totally, devotes himself to this man, and he dies every day. It's just day after day. And there's like the one scene where he's like in the alley, and he's just like, he's like pounding on the guy's chest, like just trying to get him to live. And like, when I watched it, that was a turning point for me. We're just realizing that, this is what's going to happen. Like, this is life. It's the most profound and spiritual. Yeah. And it also does. It's weird because those scenes are so good, because it does feel like it's almost a accidentally profound movie, like the filmmaker said they weren't trying to make. Right. They were just making a lighthearted comedy. I mean, they reading about it too. Like they're saying they cut out the darker aspects of what could have been. Like they just made some funny scenes of him trying to kill himself, but like they didn't get into like really twisted shit, which easily could come about from like the same kind of any human psyche, like being confronted with that, having no consequences for your actions. Like they stayed away from that, But yeah, they were just trying to make a comedy, but it's like that's the only one I can think of that like gets somewhere, as a movie. Like, San Francisco Zen Center sponsored a showing of Groundhog Day in the Trustees Auditorium of the Asian Art Museum at Golden Gate Park, 2001. It's it's beyond a cult movie. It's like just something else. At the showing to a full house, it was introduced by Daryu Michael Wenger, Dean of Buddhist Studies at the San Francisco Zen Center. And the main speaker was Reb Anderson, Tenshin Roshi, a lineage holder in the Sato Zen tradition. Oh, interesting. Reb Anderson made brief but amusing remarks prior to the film. Several people left when the showing was over. That was too bad, because a lively and informative conversation ensued. One of the first questions was, who wrote this? As it happened, I knew from writing about Danny Rubin and from owning a copy of the original script, so I raised my hand and informed the audience. Michael Wenger said he had heard that Danny Rubin was influenced by George Gurdjieff, a Western mystic with some Buddhist ideas in common, particularly around practice which they call the work. I asked what the Reb thought was the turning point in the film. Oh yeah, I guess maybe this is what I read. I concluded that begins 4/5 of the way into the 103-minute film. At about the 80-minute mark, Phil is throwing cards into the hat, and Rita points out that eternally repeating day doesn't have to be a curse. Reb Anderson disagreed. He thought the turning point came later, when Phil found he was unable to save the old man's life. Only here, he said, did Phil realize, it's not me, it's the universe. I am just the vessel. One member of the audience was troubled because Phil was too successful at the end and was given too much credit. This was chalked up by the audience to the requirements of Hollywood filmmaking. It's a hell of a movie. Oh yeah, this is good too. critical reception. The film was released to generally favorable reviews. Janet Moslin of the New York Times called it a particularly witty and resonant comedy. Desson Howe of the Washington Post noted that even though the film is a good Bill Murray vehicle, Groundhog Day will never be designated a national film treasure by the Library of Congress. Despite this, the film was selected by the National Film Preservation Board for preservation in the Library of Congress in 2006. Yeah. Roger Ebert revisited it in his Great Movies series. After giving it a 3-star rating in his original review, Ebert acknowledged in his Great Movies essay that, like many viewers, he had initially underestimated the film's many virtues and only came to truly appreciate it through repeated viewings.
Yeah, I can see that.
In 2009, American literary theorist Stanley Fish named the film as among the 10 best American films ever made, writing that, as the movie becomes more serious, it becomes funnier. The comedy and the philosophy, how shall one live, do not sit side by side, but inhabit each other in a unity that is incredibly satisfying. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an amazing movie, doesn't it? It is an amazing movie. Yeah. Here's a line you'll either recognize or you won't. This is one time where television really fails to capture the true excitement of a large squirrel predicting the weather. If you don't recognize this gem, you've either never seen Groundhog Day, or you're not a fan of what was, in my opinion, one of the best films of the last 40 years. As the day of the groundhog again approaches, it seems only fitting to celebrate what will almost undoubtedly join It's a Wonderful Life in the pantheon of America's most uplifting, morally serious, enjoyable, and timeless movies. So this is from an article in the National Review. This is from 2016. The editor's note. Okay, campers, rise and shine. It's become a Groundhog's Day tradition around here to run this cover story from the February 14th, 2005 issue of National Review over and over and over. So every year they reprint that. But again, that's something worth watching every Groundhog's Day, in fact. The movie's so good. When I set out to write this article, I thought it'd be fun to do a quirky homage to an offbeat flick, one I think is brilliant as both comedy and moral philosophy. But while doing what I intended to be cursory research, how much reporting do you need for a review of a 12-year-old movie that plays constantly on cable? I discovered that I was not alone in my interest. In the years since its release, the film has been taken up by Jews, Catholics, evangelicals, Hindus, Buddhists, Wiccans, and followers of the oppressed Chinese Falun Gong movement. Meanwhile, the internet brims with weighty philosophical treatises on the deep Platonist, Aristotelian, and existentialist themes providing the skin and bones beneath the film's clown makeup. On National Review Online's group blog, The Corner, I asked readers to send in their views on the film. Over 200 emails later, I had learned that countless professors use it to teach ethics, and a host of philosophical approaches. Several pastors sent me excerpts from sermons in which Groundhog Day was the central metaphor, and dozens of committed Christians of all denominations related that it was one of their most cherished movies. When the Museum of Modern Art in New York debuted a film series on the hidden God, film and faith 2 years ago, it opened with Groundhog Day. The rest of the films were drawn from the ranks of turgid and bleak intellectual cinema, including standards from Ingmar Bergman and Roberto Rossellini. According to the New York Times, curators of the series were stunned to discover that so many of the 35 leading literary and religious scholars who had been pulled to pick the series entries had chosen Groundhog Day that a spat had broken out among them, who would get to write for the catalog. Charles Murray, author of Human Accomplishment, has cited Groundhog Day more than once as one of the few cultural achievements of recent times that will be remembered centuries from now. He was quoted in the New Yorker declaring, "It is a brilliant moral fable offering an Aristotelian view of the world." I know what you're thinking. We're talking about the movie in which Bill Murray tells a big rat sitting on his lap, "Don't drive angry," right? Yes, that's the one. You might like to know that the rodent in question is actually Jesus. At least that's what film historian Michael Bronski told the Times. The groundhog is clearly the resurrected Christ. Rita tells Phil that people love the groundhog story, to which he responds, people like blood sausage too. People are morons. Later, at the Groundhog Festival, she tells him, "You're missing all the fun. These people are great. Some of them have been partying all night long. They sing songs so they get too cold, then they go sit by the fire and get warm, then they come back and sing some more." Phil replies, "Yeah, they're hicks, Rita." He is a thoroughly postmodern man, arrogant, world-weary, and contemptuous without cause. A blizzard stops him at the outskirts of town. A state trooper explains that the highway's closed. "Don't you watch the weather reports?" Connors replies blasphemously, according to some, "I make the weather." We don't know how many actual Groundhog's days Phil endures. We see him relive 34 of them, but many more are implied. According to Harold Ramis, co-writer and director, the original script called for him to endure 10,000 years in Punxsutawney, but it was probably closer to 10. But this is a small mystery. A far more important one is why the day repeats itself, and why it stops repeating at the end. Because the viewer is left to draw his own conclusions, we have what many believe is the best cinematic moral allegory popular culture has produced in decades, perhaps ever. Interpretations of this central mystery vary, but central to all is a morally complicated and powerful story arc to the main character.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is so deep. Phil begins to believe he is a god. When Rita scoffs at this, noting that she had 12 years of Catholic school, the only mention of religion in the film, he replies that he didn't say he was the god, but merely a god. Then again, he remarks, maybe God really isn't all-powerful. Maybe he's just been around so long he knows everything that's going to happen. This, according to some, is a reference to the doctrine of God's middle knowledge, first put forward by the 16th century Jesuit theologian Luis de Molina, who argued that human free will is possible because God's omniscience includes his knowledge of every possible outcome, of every possible decision.
His knowledge of every possible outcome of every possible decision.
An argument that human free will is possible, because that's a major question for the Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for Christians, if you believe that God is all powerful and all knowing, I mean that's where you get the Calvinist viewpoint that humans do not have free will because God knows everything that's going to happen, so therefore it's all going to happen. So you don't have any power over it. That you're born with a destiny.
Mm-hmm.
It's very anti-Catholic. Catholics have always argued for free will. Calvinists,
we do have free will.
That humans have the choice to make to be good or evil. But the Calvinists, which is Christian but Protestant against like Catholicism, that's one of their key defining characteristics is predestination. Saying that, well, if God knows everything, that means it's already known how things are going to play out, so you don't have any choice in the matter. Like every act you do has already been determined. Of course, Catholics don't like that. Jesuit being a Catholic monastic order, trying to argue against that. Saying that free will is possible because God knows every possible outcome of every possible decision. Anyway, Groundhog Day. I was reading too, like it said hardcore film fans in England watched it 24 hours, Groundhog Day, 12 viewings. Because to watch it again and again is to experience Groundhog Day, right? Samsara. I have to escape it. Yeah, it's impressive though, just like the the volume of like stuff when the movie that you thought was just a simple comedy. It's like, oh no, that's widely considered one of the most important cultural products of our civilization. How about that?
Have to see it again.